The forest remembers every promise, and when men forget, it takes what it is owed. One night, it didn't ask for gold, it asked for her. They said the forest took what it was owed. Sometimes it asked for a lamb or a pouch of coins left at the boundary stone. Sometimes it asked for silence, no axes, no fire. And sometimes, when the world forgot its manners and pushed too hard against the old green, it asked for a person. Elowen had grown up hearing those warnings in the crackle of her mother's hearth. "Keep to the road," her mother would say, turning a loaf with steady hands. "The trees have longer memories than men." Elowen believed it the way she believed in wind and rain. True, inevitable, but far away from her small cottage where she dried herbs on strings and ground salve for neighbors' burns. Until the night the forest remembered them. It began with a sound like a mountain waking. A groan rolled through the valley, low and long, and every candle flame bent toward the door as if pulled. The house trembled. From the slope above the village came a thunder of falling stone, and then a green light rose beyond the pines, an old light, the color of moss after rain. Elowen's younger brother, Finn, caught his cloak. "I have to see," he said, eyes already at the window. "You'll do no such—" Their mother reached for him, but he was quick, all long limbs and not enough sense. Elowen beat him to the door. "Finn!" She caught his sleeve. "You can't go into the woods at night." He smiled that dangerous, boyish smile and kissed her knuckles. "I'll stay on the road. Promise." And then he was smoke and shadow, gone. By the time Elowen pulled on boots and a shawl and ran into the lane, half the village was already gathered. Lanterns bobbed like yellow fruit as people hurried to the boundary stone, a waist-high granite post smoothed by centuries of palms. The air smelled of wet earth and something bitter, as if a root had been torn free. "What happened?" Elowen cried, catching the sleeve of Austin the miller. "Cairnfall," he panted. "The cliff. Part of it's come down. The old way is open." The old way. Elowen had heard those words too, but only in the hush of winter nights, as if speaking them might blow ash into one's eyes. A stair carved into the cliff before the kings, before the keepers of maps, steps that led into the heart of the forest where the stone remembered songs. It had been sealed for 100 years by a quake that folded rock upon rock. Now it yawned again. "Where's Finn?" Elowen asked. Austin's face changed. "Where is he?" "Went with the first of them," he said. "The fools, boys with more courage than coin. Talk is there's metal up there, old rails, old chains, scrap enough to make a year's wage." Elowen ran. The road shone wet in the lantern glow. At the boundary stone, the world changed. The night went velvet dark, thick with breath and leaf and the unseen. Lanterns cut small holes through it. Voices tunneled and thinned. "Elowen!" her mother called from far off, but the sound seemed to arrive by a longer path, slowed and softened by green. She stepped past the stone. The forest accepted her. The path climbed. Roots made their own script underfoot. The wind carried words she almost recognized. Finn's laugh drifted back from the dark ahead, bright, careless. "Look at that, by all the saints!" Something metal clanged, and then silence. Not silence, but the hush of a held breath. Even the insects stopped stitching their song through the night. Elowen felt it before she saw it. A pulse beneath her skin that wasn't hers, as if the ground had placed one slow hand against her ribs. A figure stepped from the trees. He was enormous, nearly 2 heads higher than any man she knew, with shoulders like an ox and a neck ridged with muscle. His skin was the green-brown of lichen, mottled with scars that caught and held the lantern light. Tusks, smaller than stories said, and smooth as river stone, curved from his lower jaw. A leather strap crossed his chest, attached to a harness that carried nothing. No iron, no blade, no hook. His hair, dark as soil, was braided back and threaded with bits of silver leaf that chimed in the wind. Ogre, Elowen thought, and felt a child's fear scrape her bones from the inside. Behind him, 3 boys, Finn among them, stood rooted like saplings, eyes wide, mouths parted. The ogre didn't touch them. He didn't need to. Something in the air held them fast, a promise or a law. "Enough," the ogre said, and the word was low stone on stone. He looked not at the boys, but at the men behind them, 3 villagers with sacks and greedy hands. "You were told." "We were told a lot of things," said Marden the smith, too brave when he was frightened. "Times are hard." The ogre's gaze slid to Elowen. It stayed there. His eyes weren't the red of nightmares, but the yellow-green of dawn through leaves. Tired eyes, old eyes. "Elowen," Finn whispered, trembling. She moved to stand between the boys and the ogre without thinking. "They're just children," she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "If there's been a trespass, take it up with the men." "The law is older than your men," said the ogre. He lifted one hand, not to seize, not to strike, but in a gesture that might once have meant peace. Cairnfall was bound for good reason after blood was spilled. You open it now, and the stone will ask and ask until it is satisfied. "We didn't open anything," Marden said. "It fell." "The forest fell," the ogre said softly, as if the thought hurt him. "It unmade what men made. It is not the same as permission." The villagers shifted, lanterns creaking on their hooked fingers. No one stepped forward. "What does the stone ask?" Elowen asked. The ogre's eyes rested on hers again, and something passed through her, a brush of cool water over a sunburn. "Balance," he said. "A keeping, a witness." "A hostage, you mean?" "A promise," he said, and this time the word was gentle. "One who will stay in the old places and mark the seasons with their breath. One who will learn the names of the trees and keep them alive in her mouth." Marden snorted. "Forest words." "Law," the ogre said, and his gaze sharpened. "Men broke it. Men die for that. The forest offers another path for the sake of children." Finn made a sound that was both sob and protest. Elowen felt the world tilt, then settle. She saw her mother's hands kneading, her brother's impossible height against the doorframe, the valley in winter when the sun seemed tired of lifting itself. She stepped forward. "Take me," she said. Finn lunged. "No." "It asks for a witness," Elowen said quickly, before fear could unmake the shape of her mouth. "A promise. I will go." The ogre looked at her a long moment. His nostrils flared as if catching a scent. He bowed his heavy head just once. "I am Garruk," he said, and when he said his name, the forest seemed to answer with a rustle like agreement. "I am sworn to Cairnfall. I will not harm you." Marden spat into the leaves. "You'll forgive if we don't take an ogre's word." Garruk did not look at him. "The forest will remember that spit," he said mildly. "It counts everything." He extended a hand to Elowen, palm up, calloused, an invitation rather than a taking. "There is still a law for men, even if you have learned to speak over it. Go home, Marden the smith. Keep to the low road. Teach your children the old hours." Elowen squeezed Finn's fingers once, hard, a promise of her own, and laid her hand in the ogre's. His skin was warmer than it looked. The forest let the boys breathe again. Lanterns guttered and steadied. The night exhaled. Garruk and Elowen walked into the trees. Cairnfall Keep clung to the broken cliff like a barnacle to a ship's hull, weathered, stubborn, and shaped by long tides. The fallen rock had opened the old stair, as the villagers said, but beyond the stair was a different world. A path that wasn't a path so much as an intention the land kept repeating. Once, men had cut steps and laid stones. Now the forest wove its own ladders from root and branch. At the end of those choices of ground stood a gate of living wood. Oak limbs braided into an arch, leaves the size of books overlapping to make a door that sighed when pushed. Garruk didn't push. He touched the wood with his forehead and whispered something that tasted like vanilla and river stones. The door sighed open. Inside, candles slept in their cups. Something chimed. A wind bell made of thin slices of agate hung where the draft lived. Moss overgrew the cracks between flags, but someone had been sweeping here. Elowen smelled sage smoke, fresh. The great hall's high rafters disappeared into shadow, but strands of foxfire glowed in glass jars along the walls, each a small moon. "This is," Elowen began, meaning to say not what I expected, but the truth felt too complicated to fit. "Home," said Garruk simply. He led her through rooms that had once been used by men and now were used by birds and by silence. And then, unexpectedly, a room that was used by books. Shelves carved from old beams cradled volumes bound in leather and bark, and what might have been vellum so old it was soft as breath. Seeds in little packets were tucked into the spaces left by lost volumes. On a low table, a mortar and pestle rested beside a curl of something aromatic. "You read?" Elowen blurted, then flushed. "I mean, of course you do. That was foolish." "It's not foolish," Garruk said, half smiling with one corner of his mouth. The expression softened his face like sunlight on an anvil. "Many who come here think ogres only know hunger. I know hunger." He tapped his chest lightly. "I also know letters. The forest taught me what I could not learn from men." Elowen's gaze snagged on a familiar spine. "Herbals," she murmured, reaching for it before she could swallow the desire. She stopped her hand inches from the shelf. "May I?" "You are the witness of Cairnfall," Garruk said. He bowed again, slightly. "You may know what Cairnfall knows." Elowen cradled the book as if it were a small animal. Someone had marked the chapters with pressed leaves. She opened to the page for feverfew and found in a neat hand a note. "Grows best on the south edge after rain." The handwriting was not what she would have imagined from a hand that big. Precise, careful. "Where will I sleep?" she asked softly. Garruk's head tilted. "Where you like," he said, as if confused by the idea that she must be given less. He showed her a room with a narrow bed built into the wall and a window that looked out into branches. He did not follow her across the threshold. He did not close the door. "There is a geas on this house," he said from the hall. "Not mine, older. It keeps what is promised and returns what is taken. If you try to leave between dusk and dawn, it will remind you." He winced, as if anticipating a blow. "I will walk you to the boundary by day when you wish. I will not keep you from it." Lowen's skin prickled. "Will you come in if I call?" she asked. He nodded once, quickly. "And if I don't call?" He paused, then sighed. "I will sit outside," he said. "Because I am what I am, and because men have called me monster so often that the word sometimes fits when it shouldn't." He rubbed the back of his neck with that enormous hand, embarrassed. "Good night, witness." "Good night, Garruk," Elowen said. She listened to his footsteps go away like a receding tide. She set the herbal on the little shelf above the bed, and then, because she was braver than her shaking hands believed, she slept. Days became a kind of prayer. Elowen rose with the pail and helped coax the garden awake. Not rows, Cairnfall didn't believe in rows, but circles of things that loved each other. Sage beside rosemary, for the stories they told one another. Chamomile ringed by time, for the bees. Yorwort, planted between two stones, because the old book said so. Garruk worked the earth with a tenderness that made Elowen's throat ache. He used his strength as if the soil might bruise. They ate at a long table scarred by old feasts. Elowen cooked because cooking made her feel like herself. Garruk tried, once, to mince onions with fingers more suited to boulders. They both laughed when the pieces came out the size of dice. He carved, though, little animals from broken chair legs, from driftwood that washed up on the river bend after storms. He put them around the house, a fox on the stair, a heron on the mantel, a wolf with its head tipped toward the ceiling as if listening for the moon. At first, their talk was the talk of weather and roots. Slowly, it became the talk of before. Were you always? Elowen started one evening, then couldn't find a word that didn't feel like a blade. Large, Garruk offered, smiling with that one corner again. Bound, she said. He looked past her toward a slice of night in the window. I was born for this, he said. Not like this. His hand hovered, helpless, over his body. My mother said I came into the world with stone dust on my tongue. She said the hill called my name like a lullaby. But I was a child. I ran. I made trouble. I had friends. The words sounded strange in his mouth, precious and painful. There was a quarrel. Men took what was not offered. The old keepers were gone. Someone had to be the hand that held the door. I took the oath because I thought the world would thank me. He laughed under his breath. It didn't. Who bound you? Elowen asked. A witch? A priest? A man who liked to call himself magister, so he wouldn't have to say coward, Garruk said, and for the first time his voice carried iron. He served a king who needed the forest quiet while roads were made. They didn't want to keep the law. They wanted to move it. When I stood in front of them, they made my oath heavier. They braided it with hunger. He looked at her then. Sorry. That is why men and ogres fear each other, because a man taught me to carry a leash inside my own skin. Elowen thought of the way his hand had trembled when he told her about the geese. And now? The king is bones, Garruk said. The magister is old, still out there, still wanting the stone to forget itself. He laid his palm flat on the table, fingers splayed. I would break this binding with my teeth if I could. Elowen covered his hand with hers before she could think better of it. Garruk's breath went out of him, as if she'd pressed on a bellows. He looked at their hands, hers small and square-palmed, his like a flattened boulder, and back at her. Something passed between them, a small, honest thing, like a sparrow alighting and then choosing to stay. Tell me your before, he said. She did. About a father who laughed like rain on a tin roof and died early. About a mother whose hands were a language, who measured spices with a cupped palm and a glance. About Finn, who arrived like a summer storm and grew like wheat. About the first time she put comfrey on a sprained ankle and watched the pain loosen its teeth. He listened the way people watch the sea, as if each wave is something both new and known. By the time the moon fattened and then thinned again, Elowen knew the names of the 3 owls who argued in the oak at night and the exact shape of Garruk's silence when it meant he was happy. She knew where the floor warped and how to step over it without waking the moss in the cracks. She knew, against her will and beyond it, that she was no one's prisoner. The house kept its promise. She could walk to the boundary by day and all the way to the market, and the Géas did nothing more than brush against her like a cat, reminding her of home. Every day, she found herself turning back sooner. Come, Garruk said, one deep dusk when the sky still held a seam of gold at its hem. If you're to be the witness, you should see who else keeps watch. He took her into the forest without a lantern. Fear came with them, but not as a weapon, more like a careful chaperone. The air ran cooler under the big pines. After a time, Elowen began to make out a glow between trunks, the soft kind, the color of pear flesh. A market bloomed in a hollow where mushrooms made a necklace of light. Not a market like the village square. A place of barter and barter's cousins, where people traded stories for seeds and the shadow of one's hand for a spool of spider silk. There were humans, yes, women with mud on their knees and hair full of burrs, but there were others, too. A fox-faced man in a green coat mending a net with his little quick teeth. A woman whose long white braid trailed moss and who drank light from a cup with both hands and sighed like someone finally opening a letter. Garruk's presence made room more than it made fear. Heads turned, a few knees bent, but no one scattered. "A keeper," someone murmured. "Elowen," Garruk said, not loud, but the sound cut the market in the right place. "Witness of Cairnfall." The moss-braided woman looked up, eyes mossy too. "About time," she said. "The last one died with her hands in the dirt, trying to pull the rain closer. We've missed you, child." She put something into Elowen's palm that looked like a seed and felt like a heartbeat. "For your pocket." "What will it grow?" Elowen asked, breathless. "A way out," the woman said, laughing, "or a way in, depending which way is out for you." They walked and tasted things Elowen could not name. A sliver of bark that melted to honey on the tongue. A thread of wind tied around her finger that sang like a hillside when she tugged it. Garruk moved with caution, mindful of his breadth. Children darted around him like fish around a dock piling, fearless. Elowen felt a weight unfurl in her chest that she had not known was tight. She found herself closer to Garruk's side than she needed to be, just to hear him. The back of her hand brushed the back of his, and they both pretended not to notice, which is its own kind of noticing. On the way back, they stopped where the path narrowed. Moonlight lay on the leaves like milk. Garruk paused, ears slanting toward the dark, listening. "What is it?" Elowen whispered. She saw it then. Not movement, but the suggestion of something stepping where she could not see. The hairs on her arms rose. "Old anger," Garruk said, moving again. "The magister?" she asked. "Or someone who still takes his measurements?" He looked down at her. In the pale light, his eyes were less yellow, more gray-green, a wild sea. "There will come a day when you must choose to leave, Elowen, or a day when you must choose to stay. I had hoped for more time before that choice." The word choice settled in her like a stone placed carefully in a wall, structural, steadying. She wanted, almost absurdly, to rest her forehead against his chest. Instead, she reached out and caught the end of one of his leather straps, the way one might catch a friend's sleeve when the ground shifted. "I'm here," she said. "Tonight, I am here." He looked at her hand, then at her mouth, and then away, as if the sequence could save him. "Then tonight," he said, "I am less alone." It began, as these things do, with a rumor. A farmer saw a shape in his cabbages at dawn and decided it was ogre-shaped because fear likes big outlines. A shepherd lost 3 ewes to a gray thing with a limp and decided the limp was guilt and the guilt was green. By the time the rumors crossed the river to the tavern, Garruk had murdered a cow and promised to come for the smith's daughter with a noose made of her own hair. Captain Reese of the River Watch arrived with 6 men and a banner that looked like the sun on a plate. "We keep the valley safe," he told the villagers, "not from them, but in front of them. We'll take care of your ogre." Elowen heard of it at the market. Men talk, especially when they are afraid and want to be heard. She ran all the way back to Cairnfall and found Garruk on the roof, repairing a broken tile with hands too big for such precision. "They're coming," she gasped. "Reese, 6 men, maybe more, axes, fire." Garruk closed his eyes, almost in relief. "Good," he said. "Good?" "They will come when the Geas is asleep," he said. "When the light fails, it will keep you." "I'm not hiding behind a house," Elowen said. "I'm not letting blood on your stones because men refuse to learn their own history." He gave her a look that was almost fond. "You are very brave," he said. "No," she said. "I am very tired, and I am not done with this." She made a circle between them with her hand, a clumsy shape for something that felt like a ring fitted perfectly. "With you." Garruk's breath clipped. He stepped back, away from the edge of the roof. "Elowen," he said, and her name sounded like a plea. "There is more you don't know. The binding, it's not just a chain, it is a calendar. When the autumn turns, when the wind comes from the north with knives in it, I am more." He gestured at himself, helpless. "More. There is a night at the equinox when I am only what men fear. "And when is the equinox?" she asked, though she already knew. She felt it in the angle of light. "Tomorrow," he said. They looked at each other in the huge quiet that lives above roofs. Elowen could see that he had prepared for this. A cellar door barred from the outside. A chain, not for others, but for his own wrist, as if he did not trust the geese to keep him where he wanted to be kept. She could not bear it. "Then we don't wait for them," she said. "We go to the boundary and speak like people." "You think men will listen to a keeper and his witness?" Garruk asked. "To a tale with no hero and no monster, only law? Then we'll speak to the one who made himself hero," Elowen said. "Magister, coward, whatever name he wears this year." Garruk started and then nodded, slowly, as if the idea had been waiting like a fox in the hedge all along. "Rhys is a soldier," he said. "He follows the cleanest blade in the room." His mouth set. "The magister wears velvet now, but I know his hands." "How do we find him?" Elowen asked. Garruk's eyes cut toward the north, where the old road broke the hills into syllables. "He found me," he said. "The first time. He will find me again." They met at the boundary stone at dusk, because men like the magister liked the look of principles and spectacle. Rhys and his men stood with their banner, and their fear sharpened to obedience. The villagers clustered behind them, heads craning. Elowen's mother, shawl tight around her shoulders, stood with Finn at her side. He looked older already. Worry does that. Elowen stood beside Garruk and felt the geese at her back like a wall she could choose to lean against or not. The wind snapped the banner, and a few crows laughed like rude children. The magister arrived last, of course, timing his entrance to the reddest light. He rode a white horse because of course he did, and he wore a coat like milk spilt on velvet. His hair had thinned, his cheeks had fallen, but his eyes were the same, small and sharp and busy with the arithmetic of other people's lives. "Garruk," he said, and made the ogre's name ugly in his mouth. "Still scribbling your child's poem on the world, I see. Law and balance and witness and other words that keep honest men from their work." He glanced at Elowen, and bribing girls with fairy lights. Elowen lifted her chin. "No bribe, sir. A bargain. Of the kind your people forgot how to make." "Ah, mouthy," he said. "Pretty, but mouthy." Garruk's jaw flexed. "Rhys," the magister called lazily, not taking his eyes from Elowen. "Take your men and fetch me the heart of the hill. It's open again, and I am old, and I do not have time to argue with moss." Rhys shifted. "Sir, the law." "The law," the magister said lightly, "is what we say it is." "No," Garruk said, and the word shook the crows from the trees. He took one step forward, and the line of men rocked. "The law is what keeps your house from falling on your head when the wind changes. You cannot write a new wind." "You can," the magister said softly, meanly, "if you pay enough." He lifted his hand. It wore a ring Elowen recognized from stories, a branch of iron burnt into a circle and hammered thin. "I carry the king's will." "The king is dead," Garruk said. "Then I carry his ghost," the magister said, smiling. He turned his horse toward the steps cut into the hill just beyond the stone. "Stand aside, animal." Garruk did not move. The magister's smile deepened. "Then we'll cut you down and call it pruning." Rhys hesitated. Elowen saw the hesitation like a candle guttering in wind. There and gone. She stepped into it. "Captain," she said, and put as much village in her voice as she could. "You know me, Elowen Holt. I've stitched half your men and saved 3 with fever, if memory has any honor left. You also know this." She gestured not at Garruk, but at the forest at their backs. "If you strike at Cairnfall, you will cut our own good out of the ground. Wells go sour. Fields stop agreeing with seed. Babies come early and go away again. You may make a road with your blades, but you will not like where it takes you." A murmur ran like rain through the villagers. Elowen's mother pressed fingers to her mouth. Rhys looked at his men, at his banner, at the Geas's shadow where Elowen stood. He looked at the magister, who looked at him as men look at tools. "I keep the valley," Rhys said slowly, "not the king's shadow." "Stand down," he told his men, and the banner dipped. The magister's eyes cooled. He flicked his reins. "Very well," he said. "A lesson, then." He lifted his iron ring and spoke in a language that felt like nettles on the tongue. The Geas trembled in the air like a struck harp. Garruk made a sound Elowen had never heard, part growl, part plea, and went to his knees. The ring smoked. The magister's horse shied, but he held it with the same hand. Elegant, mean. "Do you think I bound a beast and did not keep the leash?" he asked conversationally. "You think the law will stand up and speak with your voice, little witness? The law speaks with mine." Elowen felt something hot and enormous rise in her, as if the anger had always been there, patient and old, waiting for a shape. She reached into her pocket and found the seed the moss-haired woman had given her. It was warm as a sparrow. She had not planted it because she did not know where it belonged. She knew now. She knelt and pressed the seed into the dirt at the boundary stone. Half the seed inside the forest's side, half on the village's. "I am not a king," she said, voice steady. "I am not a keeper. I am a woman who keeps her word. I promised to witness. I promised to stay. If law is made from promises, then make this one large." She cut her thumb on the edge of the stone and let the blood fall where the seed lay. A tiny, kinless sound like a sigh came from the earth. Green shot up, first a thread, then a cord, twining the boundary stone like a lover's arm. Leaves unfurled like hands. A flower opened, slow and exact, and its heart was the color of the old light that had risen the night the cliff fell. The Geas stopped trembling. It stood. The magister jerked as if someone had slapped him. "What did you—" "I married it," Elowen said, surprising herself. The word felt right as water. "I married the hill. I married the law. I am not its prisoner." She stood. The world steadied around her like a house after a storm. "I am its bride." Garruk's head lifted. The leash that lived under his skin snapped like old twine thrown into a fire. He came to his feet, slow, as if uncovering himself. He looked at Elowen with something like wonder and something like terror and something like a man who has been thirsty for a long time and sees the sea. The magister hissed through his teeth, furious and small. "Rhys," he said, but this time it was a beggar's call, not a master's. Rhys did not move. The magister lifted his iron ring again. "Then I will unmake your husband," he spat, and racist joy made him careless. "Don't," Elowen whispered to the hill she had just married. "Please." The ground answered like a friend, "I hear." Roots surged under the path, knuckling up through soil and old stair. They wrapped the magister's horse's legs gently but insistently and lowered it, dignified, to its knees. The horse, grateful, stopped fighting. The magister did not. He lifted his hand one more time, and Garruk was there, sudden as thunder, one hand around the magister's wrist, the other around the ring itself. "O taught me to carry a leash," Garruk said, and his voice was terrible and beautiful. "But not how to live without one. She did." He bent the iron ring as if it were grass. It shrieked like a hawk and then broke. The magister went white as old bone. For a moment, Elowen felt the man he had once been, thin and hungry and entirely made of wanting. The ground, who had seen a million such men, shrugged. "Go," Elowen said to him softly, because mercy was also a law and she was learning them. "Tell your ghost that the valley keeps itself." The magister looked up, surprised. No one had refused to kill him in a long time. He spat at her feet because habits scratch at the door, then scrambled away on hands and knees, dignity forgotten, into a world that looked, suddenly, too big for him. Rhys let out a breath he might have been holding since he was born. The villagers murmured, and then, one by one, backed away from the stone. Not in fear, Elowen realized, but in the way people back away from something holy without wanting to show respect too loudly. Elowen turned to Garruk and found him looking at her with a new face, the same bones and scars, the same breadth, but something lifted from him, something that had always made him a little bowed, gone. "I don't know what I am," he said, wonderstruck and almost laughing. "I thought I would be smaller." "You are," Elowen said, and felt wicked and thrilled. "Here." She put her hand over his heart. He looked at her hand and then at her mouth, and this time he did not look away. "Elowen Holt," he said, careful. "Will you—" "Yes," she said, just as careful, because she knew what he was asking and what he wasn't, and the shape of both in her chest. But not like a leash, like a vow. He nodded, solemn and oddly shy. "May I kiss you?" he asked, because he was old law and not a boy at a tavern. "Yes," she whispered. He bent, and his mouth was warm and careful, and tasted of rosemary and something green that would never die. When he drew back, a sound rose from the trees that might have been wind and might have been applause. Finn whooped, because little brothers must. Elowen's mother cried silently into her shawl, which is what mothers do when the world scares them, and then gives them something so beautiful it hurts. They learned the new law together. Garruk still changed when the season turned and the wind swung to the north, but it was no longer an unmaking. It was a becoming. He grew taller, his tusks longer, his strength enormous. Yes, but his eyes stayed his eyes, and his hand knew where to stop. In spring, he woke smaller, nearer the size of men and nearer the shape he remembered from childhood, and Elowen would laugh to see his confusion at the way doors fit again. "Which do you love?" he asked once, halfway between the seasons, a man's mouth asking an ogre's fear. "Yes," she said, and put her hands on his face. "All of you, which is just you." She learned the paths where the hill hummed and the places she could press her ear to the ground and hear water thinking. People came to Cairnfall for counsel, for salve, for seed. Elowen took their questions seriously. Sometimes the answer was chamomile. Sometimes it was, "Go home and apologize." Sometimes it was silence, which is an answer if it is held with care. Rhys came often, alone, without banner. He and Garruk had a way of speaking without speaking that made Elowen both proud and a little nervous sometimes in the morning. How long had it been since men and keepers spoke like this? Marden the smith sent a gift, a silver knife with a blunt edge, good for bread and nothing else. He didn't come himself, not for a year, and when he did, he brought a bag of nails and a look on his face like he was apologizing in a language he didn't speak well yet. Garruk shook his hand once, gently, as if the apology were a bird between them that might startle and fly. The magister left the valley. Men say he died in a city where the law was a market stall and he came with no coin. Elowen lit a candle for him anyway, because not lighting it would have made her a person she didn't want to be. At midsummer, when the foxgloves rang and the bees taxed all hands, Elowen and Garruk stood under the oak arch that had first sighed open for them. The moss-haired woman wore a crown of fern and officiated, which was to say she told them stories they already knew and then asked them very clearly if this was what they wanted, not tomorrow, not yesterday, but now. "It is," Elowen said. "It is," Garruk rumbled. They promised ridiculous, useful things. "I'll take night watch when the river rises. I'll learn your mother's oatcake recipe properly and not pretend cinnamon is the same as coriander. I'll put my body in front of yours when the hill refuses to learn your name, and I'll put my mind in front of yours when the village refuses to learn mine. I'll be home." The forest approved with a breeze that made the foxfire jars flicker to attention. Finn cried again because some habits are good. Elowen's mother danced with Rhys, laughing like she had found a younger self in her pocket. Garruk picked Elowen up, just once, not to show he could but to feel for the first time what it meant to carry something that didn't feel like a weight. That night, after the music went to sleep and the last of the lanterns blinked, after Elowen laid her head on Garruk's shoulder and listened for the place his human heartbeat and his hill heartbeat met, after a fox screamed like a baby in the dark and both of them jumped and then laughed, Elowen opened the little shelf above their bed and took down the herbal with the pressed leaves. "Teach me the ones you had to learn without a mother," she whispered. He did. He showed her a recipe for a salve that took the heat out of wounds not made by knives. He showed her a way to steep juniper that made courage feel not like a blade, but like a bridge. She taught him a bread that rose in cold weather when other doughs sulked, and a stitch that left almost no scar. In the deep hours when the house breathed slow, the seed she'd married at the boundary sent a root down another inch and a tendril up another. It wound the stone in new ways. It listened to their sleeping and stored it as law. Years lengthened. Seasons layered like rugs. There were dangers. Wolves that had forgotten how to listen to the moon came to the orchards and had to be reminded that lamb isn't a word the valley likes to hear screamed at night. A fever ran through the village, and Elowen and Garruk took turns washing foreheads until their hands pruned and bled. Once the river rose like it wanted the road for itself, and Garruk stood in it up to his waist, pushing logs toward a place where they would do harm, and Elowen roped them together with a knot the moss-haired woman had taught her, and around until the world softened and sat down again. They had a child. It surprised them both. Love often does, even old love. He was born in late winter when ice sang on the eaves. He came quiet and then loud, and his hair was dark as soil, and his eyes were the gray-green of a river under cloud. He was big. He was small. He was neither and both. They named him Ed for the small fire he was. When he laughed, the law made a note of it and did not say why. Ed grew like a story, complicated and true. He carried pebbles in his pockets and the names of animals in his mouth. In winter, he looked like his father, broad and bright-eyed and too large for doorways, and in spring, he slid like water between people and their loneliness and made them forget to be afraid. Sometimes, in autumn, when the wind was a little cruel and berries went black, Garruk would go to the cellar and close the door and wrap the chain around his wrist, not because he needed it, but because a body remembers. Ed would sit outside the door and tell the chain stories until his father came up, laughing at the end, because the chain had fallen asleep. Elowen watched and kept. That is what witnesses do, keep the shapes of things so they don't come apart. She kept herbs and recipes and complaints and the way the wind changed when it left the river and came up the valley. She kept, too, the look on Garruk's face when he saw her first in the morning and seemed surprised that the world had kept this particular promise again. One evening, years after the night at the boundary stone, Finn, tall as a pine now and steady as a fence post, sat on their step with a cup in his hands and a look on his face like he had brought a question, and it was heavy. "You could have run," he said to Elowen, not accusing, just examining a seam to see how it held. "I did," Elowen said, smiling. "Every day, away from fear. Toward this." Finn nodded. "Men say you were taken," he said. "Men say a lot of things when they are not the ones being asked," Elowen said. She set her cup down. "Listen to the law instead." "What does it say?" he asked, and meant both the ground and his sister. She took his hand and pressed it to the stone at the door. It hummed. "It says," she whispered, as Ed tumbled somewhere inside, and Garruk's voice followed, patient and amused, "that love is not a chain. It is a door that opens when both hands push from both sides." Finn closed his eyes and listened like a boy at the river, like a man at his mother's table, like a father might someday. "I hear it," he said, astonished. "Yes," Elowen said. "Me too." On the 10th equinox since Elowen pressed her blood into the boundary stone, the valley woke to a light that felt like a memory. Not green, not gold, something in between, a dusk folded into a dawn. The market bloomed at dawn and stayed until noon. Rhys set his banner in the square and taught children to knot ropes that held without biting. Marden the smith stood before Garruk with a horseshoe bent wrong and said, "I need your hands." And Garruk laughed and bent it back, and the crowd cheered like fools because joy is useful. The moss-haired woman brought Elowen a little bag of seeds and said, "For the empty places," and winked like the moon. As evening slid down the hills, Elowen and Garruk and Aed walked to the boundary stone. The vine she'd planted was now a tree that had decided to be a tree only part-time. It braided, it flowered, it bore fruit in the wrong season, as if declining to be told what to do by any calendar that wasn't love. Elowen pressed her palm to its trunk. Aed pressed his beside hers. Garruk put his hand over both. "Do you remember," Garruk murmured, mouth near Elowen's hair, "when you thought I was a prison?" "I never thought that," Elowen said, leaning back into him. "I thought the world was a prison with very pretty leaves. You were the door." He made that soft, helpless sound he only made when she surprised him into happiness. "You freed me. You freed you," she said. "I just held the lantern." Aed looked up at them, and then at the tree, and then at the sky where the first star had decided bravely to arrive before its cousins. "What do I keep?" he asked, solemn in that hot, funny way children have. Elowen crouched and put her forehead to his. "You keep what you love," she said, "and you love what you keep." She tapped his chest. "Start with this." He nodded, serious and satisfied, and already somehow laughing. Garruk put his arm around them both, and the three of them stood and watched the valley count itself, barn, river, roof, flame, breath, and found that it was enough, more than enough, a feast. For a long time, men would tell the story of the night the ogre took a girl and the girl married a hill, and the law decided to remember its own face. They would argue like men do about the details, what color the magister's coat was, how loud the crows were, whether the seed flowered before or after the kiss. It did not matter. The stone knew. The forest knew. Elowen and Garruk knew. Aed would know soon and then for a long good while after. They were not captor and captive. They were a vow. And in a world that kept threatening to come apart, they kept each other, carefully, stubbornly, joyfully, together. If you like this story, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel grow. Thanks for watching.